Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Louise Birrell. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre located at the University of New South Wales and project coordinator for the Cracks in the Ice online toolkit. And I'll be chairing our webinar session today. So I'd like to start by welcoming you to the webinar. It's absolutely fantastic to have you with us. This is the first in a series of webinars that will be focused on crystal methamphetamine, or the drug ice, for the Australian community. And it's running as part of a series funded by the Australian Government Department of Health project Cracks in the Ice, which I won't go into too much today, as our fantastic presenter Kath will be taking us through this in her presentation. So in a moment, I'll introduce our speaker for today. Sorry to say that we don't have the video working, so it's just the audio and slides today. But I would really encourage you to still comment and ask questions at any time during the presentation. You'll notice that we have a questions tab in your dashboard where you can type in questions and send them through to us. So if at any time as Kath is talking and you think of a question or a comment, please do send them through to us, and then we'll have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation today. I'd also like to direct your attention to the Cracks in the Ice website if you haven't already had a look. It's located at www.cracksintheice.org.au, and I'd encourage you to subscribe to our subscriber list so that you can receive updates about upcoming webinars and new resources as they become available. And we are recording the session today, and we'll be making this recording as well as the slides available to you to download or share with colleagues or other interested people. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker for today, who will be presenting on where can I find trusted, evidence-based information about the drug ice, and giving us a virtual tour to the new Cracks in the Ice online toolkit. So we're extremely lucky to have Dr. Kath Chapman with us today. Kath is a Senior Research Fellow and Program Director at the NHMRC Centre of Research Excellence in Mental Health and Substance Use, located at the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre at the University of New South Wales. Kath leads a program of research looking at the epidemiology of drug and alcohol use and mental health, examining both international and national trends. She is also very actively involved in drug and alcohol and mental health prevention trials, and was heavily involved in leading the development of the Cracks in the Ice online toolkit. So we're really lucky to have her to take us through this fantastic new resource today. So I'll now be handing over to Kath for the rest of the presentation. We will come together for a quick poll towards the beginning, and then have a question and answer session at the end. I'd like to now hand over to Kath to take us through the rest of the presentation.
Thanks so much, Louise, and thank you to those joining us from around the country. This is an incredibly important issue, and we appreciate you taking the time to participate today. We hope that it's useful. And once again, I'm sorry that you can't see me. I do have my camera turned on, so it's possible that the connection will improve and you'll be able to see me at some point during the presentation. But the most important thing is that you can hear me and you can see our slides. So as Louise mentioned, I'm going to start with an overview of ice use in Australia with reference to the latest population data we have. I'm then going to talk about the development of the Cracks in the Ice online toolkit and take you on a bit of a virtual tour to let you know what information and resources are available via the toolkit, how you might find them. And lastly, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how people are using the Cracks in the Ice toolkit so far. So ice or crystal methamphetamine is a stimulant drug and variant of methamphetamine. Methamphetamine typically comes in 3 different forms: ice, base and speed, and they vary in their appearance and their potency. Ice is often a purer form of methamphetamine with a stronger and a longer lasting high and more serious side effects. It's commonly smoked, often with a glass pipe or injected. When we come to address the question, how many people use ice in Australia, it's a difficult one. Measuring ice use in the population is tricky, and to get an accurate picture, it's important to examine data from a number of sources. On the Cracks in the Ice Toolkit, we include data from a number of sources, including population surveys, hospital and other treatment centre data, and the National Wastewater Monitoring Program. But for today's purposes, we'll present rates from the most recent National Drug Strategy Household Survey. These data were collected in 2016, with the first results released 2 weeks ago in early June. The National Drug Strategy Household Survey is a large household survey of Australians aged 12 and over, which is now conducted in Australia every 3 years. It aims to provide information on drug use patterns and trends, drug-related harms and community attitudes to and awareness of alcohol and other drugs. But before we look at these data, we'd like to do a quick poll to see what you think. So the question we're asking in our poll is how many people in the Australian population used ice last year? Hopefully, it will be coming up on your screen now.
Yep, and I'm happy to say, Kath, we have the answers coming in. We'll just give people a bit more time to think through their answers.
Okay, so the options we've got up there are 1 in 100 or close to 1%, 1 in 75, which is close to 1.5%, 1 in 10 or 10%, and 1 in 5 or 20%.
Okay, I think most people have had a chance to vote, so I'll now close the poll. And looking through those results, I can say that the majority answered 1 in 75, so 40% of people thought that was the correct answer, followed by 1 in 10, so about 30% thought it was 1 in 10, and 25% said 1 in 100. So the top answer was 1 in 75.
Okay, thanks Louise. Well, in fact, the correct answer is 1 in 75. So in 2016, 1.4% of Australians aged 14 and over reported using methamphetamine, including ice, speed or base in the previous 12 months. Now, as Louise told us, 40% of you got that answer right. Now, sometimes this is a statistic that is lower than what many people think, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Now, firstly, let's look at how ice use compares to use of other illicit drugs in Australia. Cannabis remains the most commonly used illicit drug in Australia and indeed around the world, which in 2016 had been used by 1 in 10 Australians in the previous 12 months. This is followed by misuse of pharmaceuticals or prescription medications, cocaine and ecstasy, and then ice. So overall, these data are telling us that ice use at a population level is not as common as other illicit drugs. So why is there a cause for concern? In part, the answer lies in what we're seeing in terms of patterns of use, and in part, the answer lies in terms of the impacts of use. And I'm going to talk briefly about both these issues. So firstly, among those Australians who'd used methamphetamine in the previous 12 months, more than half reported using ice as the main form of the drug they were using, compared to 20% using mainly powder or speed. And this has increased from 22% in 2010 to 50% in 2013, now 57% in 2016. Secondly, for those whose main form of methamphetamine used was ice, while the majority are reporting using once or twice a year, a significant number, almost a third, reported using weekly or daily, the very small percentage reporting more than daily use. And this sits in contrast to people who use the less potent powder form of methamphetamine or speed, where only around 6% of this group reported using weekly. So when we look at what this looks like over time, we see that while that top blue line you can see reflecting overall rates of methamphetamine use in the population is remaining either stable or reducing over time, that bottom orange line is going up because among the group of Australians who are using methamphetamine, more are reporting that they mainly use ice. We also have data from hospital records that indicate that the number of treatment episodes related to methamphetamine like ice have increased in Australia such that methamphetamine now represents close to 25% of drug treatment episodes in Australia. Now, as I said before, many people report higher rates in their communities than are reflected in general population surveys. Some of this is explained by the difference between what the media tells us and what population surveys tell us, but there are other important factors at play too. Overall population statistics don't, for example, reflect the fact that rates of ice use in rural and regional areas are higher than in metropolitan centres. We also know that for every one person who uses ice, there are many, many more who are affected. The impact of ice use on individuals, families and loved ones, health services and local communities is extremely high. And in 2016, methamphetamines were rated by 40% of Australians as the drug of most concern. This compares to 16% in 2013, which means we've seen a huge increase in community concern around ice use. It's more than doubled in the last 3 years. So what is clear is that ice use and related harms in Australia are not just issues that concern a few of us. And regardless of the prevalence of ice use in our own communities, it is an issue that all of us can better understand and respond to. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. The next part of the webinar will focus on cracks in the ice and talk to you about its development and take you on a bit of a virtual tour to talk to you about some of the resources that you might find there. By way of background, in 2015 the Australian Government established the National Ice Task Force. The purpose of the task force was to investigate the impacts of ice in Australia and to provide advice to government on the actions needed to address use-related harms. In its first recommendation, the task force outlined the need for an online toolkit to allow better access to support and evidence-based information for individuals, families and communities to better respond to issues related to ice, and as a result the Australian Government funded the development of Cracks in the Ice. Cracks in the Ice is an online toolkit designed to provide evidence-based information about ice for the Australian community. Specifically, it aims to improve access to evidence-based information about ice, raise awareness about the potential harms associated with ice use, and provide information about how to access services and support. The toolkit is the result of a collaborative project over 2 years with input from members of the Australian community as well as researchers from the NHMRC Centre of Research Excellence in Mental Health and Substance Use at NDARC, UNSW and the National Drug Research Institute at Curtin University in WA. In terms of the development process for the toolkit, there were 6 stages to the development process, and it should be noted that this was an interactive process. We cross-referenced back to earlier stages of the process when we needed to, and some of the stages overlapped, and indeed some of these stages are ongoing as we seek to continue to develop the site to better meet community needs and to meet these needs as they change. So one of the things we did relatively early on in the process was to conduct a scoping survey, which we did in December 2015. The aim of the survey was to engage end users, so ice users, family members, health professionals, parents and the general community, to better understand the information needs about ice and to seek feedback to inform the initial design and development of the toolkit. And some of the participants in our scoping survey consented to be contacted to provide feedback on a beta version of the toolkit, and they were then involved later on in the development process as well. 451 people completed the survey, and almost everyone who took part had been affected in some way by ice use, either their own or someone else's. 30% had used ice in their lifetime, and of these 22% reported they were using weekly. 29% of people had experienced family problems or marriage difficulties as a result of someone using ice, and 19% had been pushed, hit or assaulted by someone using ice. The survey was quite detailed and covered a range of issues, so I'm only going to touch on a few of them today. But when asked why they would visit a website about ice, 41% said to get information for myself, 30% said to find out about how to get help for a friend or family member, and 27% said to get information for a friend or family member. When given the opportunity to suggest other topics they'd like information on, people asked for advice on how to help a friend or family member using ice, how to deal with someone who's under the influence of ice or how to protect yourself from aggressive behaviour, legal consequences of using ice, and warning signs of ice use and dependence. Now, alongside this consultation process, we also reviewed or adapted existing resources developed by our teams here at NDARC and the NDRI. We also scoped externally for resources. External resources were assessed for inclusion based on an adapted version of the NHMRC Body of Evidence Matrix. Resources were assessed for their evidence-based generalisability and applicability to the Australian context. For those interested in more information about this process, you can find it on our website under the Q&A section of the toolkit. So please go and have a look if you're interested to find out a little bit more detail about how we assess those resources. We also engaged with external experts at different stages throughout the project to understand that we were presenting information in the right way and to gain ideas about other ways to enhance the toolkit. Jack Nagel, for example, provided a valuable consumer-based perspective on the toolkit, particularly relating to the needs of ICE users themselves. And we collaborated with the Drug Policy Modelling Program at NDARC to gain expertise in the area of the law around ICE, which is an incredibly complicated area. And Caitlin Hughes provided expert review and advice in this area for us. We also engaged Gillambar, an Indigenous creative agency, to help us develop a page outlining the services that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people could access for issues relating to ICE or other drugs. Gillambar ensured we were using culturally sensitive language and culturally appropriate images and assisted us with the design and layout for this content. And I should point out that this area of the website is one that is currently under development, and Dennis Gray and Ted Wilkes at the National Drug Research Institute at Curtin University in WA are currently leading a project as part of the ongoing development of Cracks in the Ice to better meet the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. This project began in late 2016 and consultation and development are currently underway. So on the basis of our end-user consultation, our scoping of the evidence and collaboration with experts, we developed a beta site. And using the principle that we aim to provide information for groups including people who use ICE, families and friends, health professionals, parents, teachers and students and community groups, we developed content and resources across 4 specific groups and around 3 broad topics: getting the facts about ICE, how does ICE affect you, and staying safe. And in August and September 2016, we contacted our initial scoping survey participants and we advertised through social media to gain feedback on the beta version of the toolkit. The aim was to seek feedback on the content and the language, the design and the layout, and the images and navigation of the website. A total of 41 participants completed an in-depth survey between August and September. You can see there I've got some of the demographics up for you. The median age 31 years, around half female. Parents, students, health professionals and teachers were represented and a wide range of occupations. In terms of the overall feedback, it was generally positive. 93% rated navigation as good or very good. People found the most helpful aspects to be get the facts about ICE and the families and friends section. The least helpful aspect was the communities page, which has undergone substantial development since then, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that later in the presentation. The most commonly identified areas for improvement related to increasing engagement and personal connection, balancing the low prevalence, high impact message that I talked to you a little bit about at the beginning of the webinar, and increasing ease of navigation. In terms of what else the community asked for, people wanted more information about how ICE affects the brain and long-term and short-term effects, and some personal stories. You can see there that quote, it would be significantly improved if you were to get some attributable quotes from a diverse range of voices. We made a number of changes in response to the feedback, including changes to content, design and organisation. And this is the toolkit in its current form. This is the homepage. The general layout of the homepage hasn't undergone a major overhaul, but there are a number of significant changes that we made. Firstly, we've incorporated quotes that we had access to and permission to use, and these appear in a scrolling banner at the top of the page and at other places throughout the website. We've retained the access to information from the homepage across these 3 topic areas of getting the facts about ICE, staying safe, and how does ICE affect you. The ability to access group-specific information remained, with the added functionality of drop-down menus to allow users to more easily access information within these sections from wherever they are. So this banner appears at the top of every page. We added a Get Support Now button that also appears on every page. We've also added more information to the homepage to assist visitors in understanding the purpose of the website. We have a short introductory video animation, and our mission statement has also been made more obvious in this version. And in an area where there is a lot of information out there in the public domain and sometimes misinformation, it was really important to the community to have information that could be trusted and was based on evidence. And that was something that was identified by the community as critically important. A companion booklet is also available for download from the homepage, and we have icebreaker quiz questions to engage users. Now, there's a lot of content on the website. We don't have time to take you through all of it today, so I urge you to go online and have a look. But I do want to take you through the main sections of the toolkit in terms of what you might find across those three main topic areas and the four main groups in the community. So I'd like to start by talking to you about the Getting the Facts section. So you can access this section via the grey tile or via the banner at the top of the page. And this section of the toolkit covers key general information about ICE, including what is ICE, how many people use ICE, why do people use ICE, and what are the laws about ICE. Some of this content we've touched on briefly already, but I just want to show you what would happen if you clicked on what are the laws around ICE. So here you'll be taken to a section of the toolkit where you'll find general information relating to methamphetamine and the law. And if you scroll down, we have a table where you can tab across to look at information relating to the state or territory where you live. And further down the page, you can find expandable information tabs covering frequently asked questions relating to ICE and the law. And this feature of contractable and expandable information is used quite a lot through the site, especially for topics where there's a lot of information to present. And we want people to be able to access as much or as little as they need. So turning now to our second topic area, I want to take you briefly through some of the information covered under what are the effects of ICE, which again you can access through the blue tile or via the banner at the top of the page. Now this section of the toolkit provides information about how ICE works in the brain and other parts of the body, the physical and mental health effects of ICE, and the effects of ICE when taken in combination with other drugs. If, for example, you clicked on what are the mental health effects of ICE, this is the page you'd see. If you hover over these terms, you'll see a brief description of what they mean, and this feature is used quite a bit throughout the toolkit as well. We have tried also to make it easy for people to download PDFs of content that they find particularly useful or to share content with others. There's also related content here on how ICE works in the brain and what happens if you use ICE with other drugs. And if you scroll down, again, there's expandable and contractable information about mental health problems associated with ICE use. And then again, at the bottom of this page, there are more links to related content like physical health effects of ICE in both the short and the long term. I now want to take a look at the third topic area, staying safe. This area of the toolkit covers topics like when and where do I get help, and how do I support a loved one, and again can be accessed via the orange tile on the homepage or the banner at the top. So if you were to click on when and where do I get help, for example, you'd be presented with a range of options. You'd find information on how to access immediate or emergency help, and this section also includes a self-assessment for ICE users called the Severity of Dependence Scale, which based on an individual's answers links to feedback about current ICE use and recommended next steps to take. This is also the page you'd be taken to if you click the Get Support Now button, which appears at the top of every page. So if you click on this button, you'd find information about emergency support, a self-assessment for ICE users, and if you scroll down, you'll find links to the Alcohol and Drug Information Service and state and territory-based numbers to call to access support or to find services in your area. We also link here to another section of the toolkit on what types of help are available, where we have information about different treatment options. So having covered those three topic areas and explained the way we've organised them, I now want to take you briefly through what you'll find if you access the drop-down menus at the top of the banner that appears on each page. So again, some of these sections of the toolkit link to a lot of content and a number of resources, so I'm going to touch on them briefly today and I urge you to have a look yourselves. I'm going to start with information for families and friends, which you can access via the drop-down menu at the top or by clicking How do I support a loved one in the orange Staying Safe tile. This takes you to a section of the toolkit with a number of tiles that will take you to more information and resources on a number of different topics. The information is grouped under 4 headings. concerned about someone using ice, which contains some information on how to tell if someone's using ice and some warning signs of dependence. Starting the conversation, which contains tips for starting a conversation about ice use with a loved one. How to protect yourself and others, which contains tips for protecting against violence and aggression and how to help someone who's taken ice. And what type of help is available, which I mentioned briefly before, that contains information on what types of treatments are effective, what to expect from withdrawal, and where to get support. So taking you now across to see what tools we have available for health professionals, this section is accessed by a drop-down menu at the top of the homepage or indeed of any page. The resources for health and other professionals are organised under 3 topic areas: online resources and videos, including links to evidence-based training, quick tips on a number of important topics, and links to more in-depth guidelines for professionals in health and emergency service sectors. If, for example, you clicked on online resources and videos, you would be taken here, where you could click on each of these tiles to find more information about and access to these particular resources. If, for example, you clicked on guidelines, you'd be taken here, and you could click on each of these tiles to get more information about and access to these resources. I now want to turn to the Community Toolkit section. Now remember, this is a section that in the beta version was fairly underdeveloped, and people wanted more in this section. So we've done a fair bit of development work in this section. Now this section can be accessed via the drop-down menu at the top of every page. Now this section of the toolkit contains a range of resources to assist local communities and services to run forums and events about ice. So there is a build your own handout tool to assist people to pull together PDFs of information that is specifically relevant for their communities or for their event. There's also a stakeholder kit that contains information for promotion via social media, a feedback loop to allow for input into what people want to see on the site. You can also order for free hard copies of the Cracks in the Ice companion booklet and flyers for your community, or if you prefer, you can download soft copies. There's a downloadable PowerPoint presentation, as well as links to the Alcohol and Drug Foundation and the Local Drug Action Team, or LDAP program. Now, the LDAP program has also been funded by the Australian Department of Health as part of the response to the National Ice Task Force report, and this particular program helps communities work together to prevent alcohol and other drug harms. LDATs deliver evidence-based primary prevention activities to strengthen protective factors to minimise alcohol and other drug harms in their communities. And by 2020, it's hoped that there are 220 LDATs around the country. Now, applications for the next round of LDATs are now open, and I encourage you to go online and have a look if you're interested in applying for support for a program in your community. You can go directly to the ADF website, or you can go via the link on our Community Toolkit page. And as I mentioned, if you are interested in ordering copies of the hard copy booklets, you can do this online, and we can send copies to you in multiples of 20, 50 or 100 out to you for free. We have promotional flyers as well. The booklets were developed as a companion to the online toolkit, and they aim to summarise key information from the Cracks in the Ice website, to promote the online toolkit and to direct people to our online resources. And as I said, the electronic version of the booklet is also accessible online. Excuse me. Lastly, I'd like to take you through the information we have for school communities, which can be accessed via the drop-down menu at the top of the page. So this section of the toolkit contains tools for parents, teachers and students, many of which are on a companion website called Positive Choices. Now, Positive Choices is an existing online portal providing evidence-based drug education information to teachers, parents and students. It was also funded by the Australian Government Department of Health, and it was developed by our team here at CREMS at NDARC at UNSW, and it was launched in December 2015. And this website includes hundreds of resources on alcohol and other drug information for teachers, parents and students, ranging from games, fact sheets and booklets to evidence-based programs that can be fully embedded into the high school curriculum. For those of you joining us who are working in schools or specifically with young people, or who are parents of adolescents, I really encourage you to go and have a look at this website, positivechoices.org.au. There are a host of really useful resources on this site. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Cracks in the Ice is a living site. It's been designed to be maintained and updated, so we will be conducting regular reviews of emerging literature, of national and international websites and networks to identify new evidence-based information and resources. We'll also be doing ongoing technical maintenance, monitoring of traffic to different parts of the site in order to improve the content and quality. And we're hoping to have continued end-user input into development. We hope to update or develop resources according to community use and emerging community needs, and we really encourage you to get in touch with us via the website and give us your feedback. User requests are reviewed monthly by the project team, and new content will be developed using the same procedures implemented in Phase 1, and external resources will be reviewed in the same way. So if you know of a resource that you think you would like us to review for inclusion, please get in touch with us. We're also planning to do a Think Aloud evaluation to evaluate the usefulness of the online toolkit among end users, to better understand how people respond to the information provided in the toolkit, to highlight which sections of the toolkit are best able to engage and where and how we might improve that site. And we'll be looking at doing that evaluation over the coming months. Now, before we open up to some questions and some feedback, I just wanted to talk to you briefly about who is using Cracks in the Ice and how they're using Cracks in the Ice, because this is, although it's very early days yet, we've only been launched for, I think, just over 2 months, it's already starting to give us some information about what might be the useful sections of the site, how people are interacting with it, and how we might improve the site. So since launching on the 3rd of April, we've had close to 5,500 users, and I think just looking at the latest data yesterday, I think this is now up to over 6,000. Around 35,000 page views, with people viewing between 4 and 5 pages per session, so people having a little bit of a look around the site, which is good, and spending just over 3 minutes per session on the site at this stage. When we look at where our users are located, the main use so far has come from the metropolitan centres, but we are having some growing interest from regional and rural areas, and we really hope to see this grow, because we're hoping that this will be a resource that's useful not only for people living in metropolitan areas, but also for people living in the regional areas where we know this is a significant issue and where we know people have a lot of difficulty accessing support. And in terms of the most visited pages on the site, other than the home page, the most popular page is how many people use ICE. And I guess this makes sense when we consider the amount of media attention that's been given to this issue over the past 2 years in Australia. And people want to know what the evidence tells us about how many people use ICE. The community toolkit page has also been really popular, and we've had a lot of feedback from people about the way in which they're using that page and those resources to support the activities that they're doing in their own services and in their own communities, which is great. The What is ICE page is also a important one that people are looking at, and I think that's interesting too, because I think there's one of the areas of feedback we get from the community is, I don't even know, what is ICE? Is it the same as speed? Is it different? So I think that tells us that people are really interested in getting some of that basic information around ICE. And the health professionals page, and particularly the online resources for health professionals, has also been a very popular one so far since launch. We also have a social media presence on Facebook and Twitter to promote the toolkit, as well as to promote other information and resources relevant to this issue. And so far, 76% of the social media referrals to Cracks in the Ice were derived from Facebook. And I guess while we're in this stage of trying to increase the profile of the site, increase awareness and access, we encourage you to follow us on Twitter and Facebook and like and share our links and our resources. I just wanted to share with you a little bit of feedback so far because it tells us a little bit about what people are finding useful about the site and how they're using the resources. So a number of people are using the site to support work that they're doing in their own communities, which is great to see. So at this quote from an alcohol and other drug service provider, great to see Cracks in the Ice up and running. Your booklets are easy to read and will be beneficial to all those in the community who attend our groups and community ICE forums. As a CDAP member, I'd like to order your new resources to display at our upcoming workshop for families and carers, and this will be a great resource for our support group. And I should point out too that in just over 2 months we've had orders for or have distributed over 20,000 resources, booklets and flyers related to the site. So there's clearly a need for this information in the community. Finally, a quote from a parent. I was out with friends last week and this topic came up and we all admitted we didn't know enough about it given its popularity, and most importantly how to talk to kids about it openly and frankly and have some facts. I also just want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the researchers, the experts and the many community members from around the country who provided their input and their feedback during the development of this resource. And we'd also like to thank the individuals who so generously shared their experiences with us and allowed us to use their stories on this site. And I'd just like to end with this quote provided by one of the community members who helped us develop the site, because it encapsulates one of the key things we were trying to achieve. I think it's great as it's important for people to feel like they're not alone. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. Please go online and have a look and get in touch with us if you'd like to give us some feedback, positive and negative. Please tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like, what you want to see more of, and please follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And if you like the site, tell as many people as you can if you think it's likely to be useful. I also want to draw your attention to the next in the Cracks in the Ice webinar series, which is called How to Support Families and Friends with a Loved One Using Methamphetamine, an Introduction to the Checkmate Support Package. The Checkmate program is being developed as part of the ongoing development of Cracks in the Ice Toolkit in response to an identified need for more support for families and friends. Associate Professor Frances K. Lampkin is leading that project, and I encourage you to register for that event later in the year. And we now, I think, are going to hand over to our facilitator, to Louise, who's been looking at some of your questions as they've been coming in. And I hope that I can answer them. I do feel like the information and support needs are so vast in this area that I may not have the answer in my head, but I at least hope I can direct you to where on our site you might find those answers. Thanks, Louise.
Thank you, Kath. That was a fantastic presentation and such an interesting resource. And we do have some questions coming in, but I would encourage anyone else who has any questions to have a look at your questions tab and type them in and send them through to us so we can have a bit of a discussion. But just to kick us off, we've had a few people ask whether the resources that you've talked about today will be available for people to order in hard copy form.
Okay, thanks, Lou. Yeah, so the companion booklets that I talked about are available in hard copy form, and there's also a promotional flyer so that you can use both the flyer and the booklets to distribute within your service, within your community, within your school. And those booklets and flyers are available to order in packs of 20, 50 and 100, and we'll distribute them and send them out to you for free. So absolutely go online and order what you think you need and get them to as many people as you think might benefit.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kath. And also just to point out that we do have a fantastic resource on the site called the Download Your Own PDF, where you can go on and choose which of the resources are relevant to you and check boxes, and it will then compile that into one single document, a PDF file, which you can then download, share, print, email. So I think that's one of the great functions on the site to draw people's attention to. And just to take us back, step back a bit and have a bit more of a discussion about the problem of ICE in our communities. We hear so much about it and we know it's having a huge impact across Australia, and this website and the resources look fantastic and have a lot to offer. But can something like this site solve the problem of ICE, and could you argue that this might be a little too little too late?
Thanks, Lou. Yeah, I think the devastation that many people have experienced in their own lives and in their own communities is enormous. And I think sometimes the the Australian community can feel overwhelmed by this problem. So I guess to tackle that in two parts, is this too little too late? Well, firstly, improving access to evidence-based information and resources, the way in which we're doing that through this site is critically important, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. We absolutely need to continue to support primary prevention initiatives like the LDAP program. We need to invest in early intervention, treatment and rehabilitation so that people can have access to the services they need when they need them and where they need them, and all too often this is not the case. So absolutely we need to tackle this problem from a number of different directions, and we could and should be doing more. But secondly, is this too late? Is this too big? I hope not, and I don't think it is. And one of the positive stories to come out of the data from the National Drug Strategy Household Survey is the fact that young people in Australia are increasingly making positive choices about alcohol and other drugs. More young people are choosing not to drink, not to binge drink, and not to use illicit drugs. And we've seen these trends emerging over the past 6 years or so, and they mirror trends we're seeing in other parts of the world too. So our generation of young people is making better choices about alcohol and other drug use than our generation. And I think there is a story of hope there. We also know that early intervention for ice use can be really effective. We know that prevention programs can be effective, especially school-based prevention in terms of preventing uptake of alcohol use and other drug use. So I guess I'd say yes, in a sense this is too little because we absolutely could be doing more, but no, it isn't too late.
Great, thanks Kath. And we've had a bit of interest on the question line about any resources that we have for primary school students. Do we have any available for students that young, and particularly to support children who might have parents who are using ice?
Right. Now, not on our website. So what I'm going to do, I've got my laptop here and I've got the website open so I can go to the schools section and have a look. On the Positive Choices website, which I'd encourage you to go to, we have a range of resources for primary school students and for secondary school students. Now, many of the resources are aimed at general drug use and information about illicit drugs in general rather than ice use specifically, but many of the principles are the same. So I would encourage you to go on and have a look at the resources that are there, because we do have some resources for primary school students. Having said that, the majority of the work in this area is done with, in terms of that very early prevention stage, is done with early adolescents, so Year 7 and Year 8 students, but absolutely there are some resources there for primary school students. So I'd encourage you to have a look, but also I guess that's something for us to consider and have a look at what we do have available for primary school students, and whether that's an area where we could look at developing something specifically relating to ice use. So even though the principles might be the same, we may be able to adapt some of that information. So that's something we should definitely have a look at. Thanks, Lou.
And just to follow on from that, to mention that there is a program in development to support families and friends of people using ice called Checkmate. So it's currently in the development phase, but it will be available through the Cracks in the Ice portal. And the goal for that program is to support families of those who are using ice. So I think it's originally designed for more adult families, but they are looking at incorporating some resources for adolescents and potentially children, so that could be something to keep an eye out for as well.
Yeah, it's a huge issue for especially that issue that was raised for young kids who whose parents are using ice.
And we've had somebody ask us about, when completed, how will people access the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander resources that are currently in development. And I guess I'd encourage people to subscribe to our subscriber list to stay updated about those resources and how and when they become available. So if you hop onto the site and subscribe, you'll get the latest updates about when they're up and how you'll be able to access those.
That's right, Lou. And I guess at this stage, because part of the consultation process with that project, it's being done in partnership with a number of groups, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander stakeholders around the country, and part of the consultation process is exactly around how those resources will be linked and how to access them. But so I can't tell you how that will look, but what I can tell you is that on the Cracks in the Ice website there will absolutely be clear information about how and where to access those resources once developed. And as Louise said, if you'd like to particularly to be informed and about updates related to that, please get in touch and subscribe. We'll keep you updated.
Thanks, Kath. And we've had a couple of questions come through just about the numbers of people using ICE in Australia, and wondering whether the treatment delays and the number of people presenting to treatment are reflected in the National Household Survey results, and if there's any comment you could provide around that, Kath.
Yeah, sure. So the treatment data that I was referring to was 2015 data. We've got treatment data from a number of different sources, but I was talking about 2015 data. The population statistics that I talked about were mainly coming from 2016, but we also started to see some of these changes in the 2013 data. So those changes I talked about in terms of among methamphetamine users, an increase in people using ice over powder form, that trend had started from 2010 to 2013, and now again has continued to increase from 2013 to 2016. So I think we're starting to see some of those changes being reflected in the treatment and service data, because I think there is a parallel in that timeline. But yes, but I guess we'd need to continue to monitor the treatment data for this year and for future years to see how those changes in use are playing out in terms of the treatment centre data.
Yep, thanks, Kath. And I guess it just points to what you're saying before, that this is one piece of a puzzle to help with
Absolutely.
this issue. And of course there are lots of other wonderful solutions. We're hoping this resource will be a good starting point for people to go to.
And the other point just on that issue about the difference between what's reflected in treatment data and what's reflected in population surveys, I think one of the explanations for why we're seeing an increase in presentations to accident emergency departments and other alcohol and other drug settings related to methamphetamine is so the changes in patterns that I just talked about, but also the increase in regular use, because one of the things we know is that people tend to use crystal methamphetamine or ice more regularly than if people are using speed, they tend to use it less regularly. So we know that there's, with increased regular use, there's also increased risk of dependence. We also know that ice is a more potent form of crystal methamphetamine, so it's associated with increased risk of dependence. So I think what we're seeing in these treatment stats is a reflection of these increased preference for ice use, as well as changes in patterns and use, increased regular use and dependence. And that's certainly been part of the commentary in this area with a number of researchers that are looking at it in some detail.
Fantastic. And we've had another question come through asking whether there's any awareness programs delivered in school that can be taken on before people start using drugs.
Yes, absolutely. We actually have really good evidence now for the effectiveness of school-based prevention programs that are delivered to young people before they're exposed to the particular drug that we're interested in looking at. So, and there's a series of programs called the Climate Schools program that you'll also see linked to the Positive Choices website, which are actually developed here at NDARC. Now, these programs have been trialled in over 14,000 kids around Australia, and they've been shown to have really positive effects in terms of delaying the uptake of use and reducing harmful use of alcohol and reducing use of other drugs like cannabis. Now, these programs are delivered, there's a program for alcohol that's delivered in Year 7, alcohol and cannabis that's delivered in alcohol is delivered in Year 8, alcohol and cannabis in Year 8 and 9, and psychostimulants and new and emerging drugs in Year 10. And the idea behind those programs is exactly what you've drawn on in your question, that prevention is likely to be effective if we get in early before young people are exposed to those substances.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kath. I'm sure there'll be a few people checking out that resource. Well, I think we've grilled you with enough questions and had a fantastic session today. I'd just like to thank everybody for coming along to this first inaugural Cracks in the Ice webinar, and to remind you that we will be having future webinars, with the next one focusing on how to support family and friends who have a loved one using crystal methamphetamine. So you can now go on and register for that webinar, and we will be having future webinars coming up. So please subscribe to keep up to date with the latest updates. So I'd like to thank Kath for her fantastic presentation today, and hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise.